Even the darkest of clouds carry a silver lining if you are brave enough to look for the light in the shadows. Join our journey through life's toughest challenges as we find the beauty hidden within the struggle. Subscribe today and always find the light with us.
No, didn't to wait for the meeting to end. My boss stood up in front of 12 and first and sitted and said right there the besters and sated right there at the table. Marcus, W's going in a terrifying direction. Your servers are no longer required. Calm worn by its. Cars wares are no longer required. Calm warrants. Rare swears smile. Like he has tightick in the mirror that morning. $40 million in committed capital was sitting on that table. Pens were out. Term sheets were out. Term sheets were out open. W word out. Term C were out open. W were 11 minutes from the largest cluster in company history. My name is Marcus Hellas, Cam 51. Me men's from the largest close. I spent 17 years building the financial architecture that made everything in that room possible, and the man would just fired me in front of 12 investors in front of me in front of 12 investors. He'd been with the company for 4 months, but here's what did now. I saw this con, everything in that room. Every modal, every projection, every number. Dumburst investors were tinting on. Ran the earth, a system I built. A system only I can hard escape. He can worth and be can't fit. He can resembling by carer. He was actually lighting the fuse in Bing Perrer. He was actually lighting the fuse on his own. Because it's to just the words. It was the way he said them. Loud enough for everyone to hear. Timed perfectly so the investors, convested perfectly so the investors, his boldness, his vicendus, that's vismus, his vismus, Biruk Ines Co from a Starichi Consulting Firm in Boston, the kind of guy who says North Star, and bolding each in Semincent and doesn't flinch. The kind of Gribors to wields his entire identity on looking like the smartest person in the room by making sure everyone older than him looks irrelevant, like he. I was a piece of old furniture he hadn't gotten around to replacing yet. I held it together in that conference room. Years of practice. You don't spend 17 years in finance without learning how to keep your face neutral, where Stomatch is preffing trave, where zerping trek. Their falterer. 10. I looked across the table at Telbuarin, the lead partner from Creston Capital. Philip had been my contact for Siclef. Philip had been my contact for 6 years. 6 years of quarterly calorsis, data reporting, and 2 in the morning emas when the numbers needed cleaning. He've mean the smallest looked. Not 16. Some a thing sharper. Awareness, and ubbis a mething, Derek didden. Let me back up. Because none of this makes sense without now what the last 17 years cousins without now what the 17 years actable quarterly cost me might their fears. Genuine financial analyst with an Merck background and a stubborn bell prime belief that numbers, if you boiled the right system around them, could to tell you anything. Most people in my position stuck to standard modals. Spreadsheets, tintard modals. Spreadsheets, indistressed prard modals. 2. Manning a something's balked into them that nobody questioned because they been there longer than anyone Sem could remember. I biled everything from scratch, 2 quack longer, but something scratch. 2 longer. Was messier, but it was man, and it worked. My doggard, messier, but it was 7 when I 2 quack that job. She's 20 vorn now and live in port, my live in Portland. WI talk on Sundays if I'm lucky. Stop calling every day around the times he turned 15 and I realized that I wasn't going to make it to more than Halfer volleyball games. She was right to stop calling to make it to more than Halfer volleyball games. She was right to stop calling. I was never there enough to yara more than that. My wife held the was together for foreign. SH is the reason by Dr. Still Calzatals. When W-Ain diverts. Cowlit, when W-Ain divert quietly, without drama, the way 2 people do when they've just run out of rations to stay. Say cost for men's for me at the kitchen table and say something I never forget. Marcus, the company will find someone as to boil their gnomes, your date her mumbers. Your doctor only gets one father. I nod like I understood. I did like I understood. Not for a long time after that. Not for a long time after that. Not for a longing time after that. I'm not filling you so you feel sorry for money for men. I'm telling you because you need to understand what was steading on my shoulders when I walked into that conference room. Meridian Capital Group Manag Rupal, Maren Min Minid Fursimal. There were 3 recessions, a global pandemic, and half a dozen leadership hand. Half a dozen leadership changes above me. I'd helped grow that number to just under 3 billion. I was the face of the company. I never wanted to be. I was the McCann undermat it. Ding dang then made everything a less to run without making noise about it. Derek revved 4 months before that conference room moment. A Cameron would mandate from the CEO to modernize operations and attract next generation institutional capital. I understood what that meant the first time I jarred it. Next to what that meant the first time I jarred it. Next generation institutional capital means you firms with their wanter was accretion faces running to farbs as winter cur faces brunding the sure pardon. The first time, Derek, you said the phrase Kasser Infrastruktur, I sat down my coffee and listened carefully. Legacy Infrastruktur, 2 words. But in a company like Oserkesher, 2 words. But in a company like Ozars, they mean one thing. Someone Oleko's about to bake categories at the problem. He said it in on. Saying one. Tombanen. Thing a bayuriting, casserole. Offhand. Like he has to his desk rubbing a filing cabinet 90DD to get rid of. The CEO nodded slowly. The Ewinger people on the team nodded faster. The 2 kilogids my tester. The 2 kilogids my dander no done. I just nodded and drove it down. The signeds did endure bit town. Derek had. Brocken sills. De skin fire mounds to redo o'er investor materials. Beautiful deck. Very clean. Various. Modern. Memberin modern. Maperid now in it. 17 years of modals and mythology. And the new deck described o financial infrastructure is proprietary symbols creature simple and cutting its enable. And cutting ids indelidix framelworks. My spramworks. My frameworks. My framwigims. My framwidum. Marcus, the investors don't need to know the plumbing. They need to belim in the visionin. I smiled. Said, I understood. Said I understood. Went back to my office and started thinking fully about the plumbing. Here's what nobody on Deer's team understood about the steam. There weren't just modals. There were an ecosystem. 3 layers of proprietary forecasting logic built on top of a custom data environment, the world from ebort that pulled from Ford and port interference seller remits, every quarterly refart naira and seller. Every quarterly respects to 71 slammed 9 years ran through their fair and seller. Every fundiscation recommendation. And for in the last 3 years, since a Nearman's with a fraudulent third-party submission that almost case submission that almost cost West US $80 million, all financial outputs required my quered McQuarpic of Vitara's aid of oration. Something like a key phobe, but built to financial security standards, or south security stand, poard hop side help designs in the protocol, the board had a ped approved it live it in my prophesis. Every investor aspertizometers and inners. Investor aspert WD sent in the last 3 years had that a buddy caveman, the netted the meatity. You couldn't see it on the page. But it was there. And any competent agator would find it. Derek Cade signed it off on the system 3 months after joining. I presented it to him as suburti mishers, which it was 2 Christians about security and mishir. Never as skid how it worked. Never as skid what happened if it wasn't you said. Some people don't read the footnotes. Derek was one of them. Now, the investors around that them. Now, the investors around that table. 3 from Establishment, East Coast Farms, 2 from Chicago, 1 from Dallas, and 6 represent, and Caco, 1 from Dallas and her family offices that had been slowly inserting of family offices that had been slowly increasing their commitment to use over the prevent farble. Darvel wishing their commented was over the previous 4 years. HIS, Fire M, alone represented 20 of the 40 on the table. I had count Philip for 6 years. 22 pin, doing thirve, 2 down, quarters together. I called in directly both time quarters together. I called in directly both times before the report attends, before the report hit his decks and walked him through the moon herself. Tand of relationships doesn't get built in Fort and Monts. It gets built in Horn Fern. In halves, it gets built in Horn Cals at 11 p.m. and Handwort and Nottins after Tifikov's conversations. About 8 months before that day, Killip had mentioned in something during one of our regular callers. A most casual. Had most casual. I am Marian Yurik. Making some changes to your side of the house. Anything I should know about? I told him changes were always in motion in a growing fire. He was quiet for a moment. Marcus Markapen's commitment is based on our confidence in the electrical Fruscon River's report finding your reporting. That rigor has a face. I hated him. I filed it away. 2 weeks later, I hated him. 2 weeks later, I hate away. 2 weeks conversation with my outside. A woman, Nan Diani Foster, poor be my attorney for 9 years, and words and fears and fit, to which had a very precise mind and a very well tolerance for incorporate the theater. I need to talk through something, I told her. You are about to push in, possibly, and you want to know what your opinions are. I want to know what the investors' opinions are, I said. Specifically regarding the apestincation protocol. She was queuing for niftherscation protocol. She was queued for information for dedication proto. She was queued for yet for advocation. Place, plan, person. What came out of that meeting was simple. Based entirely on existing agreements already in place. The watasnication protocol had been witted to proton to protus from froden resproined. That was its stated purpose. It had been disclosed in organic hypland. That was its stated purpose. It had been disclosed in or annual compliant to gozmentation froden 3 conic sequenitios. Every investor in Opal had signed had acknowledgement of that disclosure, what the disclosure said. In plain language, if the Nandwitition officication, officers pieces to be affiliated with the firearm during an ative capital craze. Our preliminary term sheets are subject to mandatory review by outside weight. Doors minonary term skeeters cation. Mandatory review. By outsugitors binding execution, conscript. Mandatory review. Not a suggestion. Not a courtesy. A protocol merman embed in the compliance language. Every investor had a canoid. Every investor had a canoid. And was the named redication officer. Maine. Had been for 3 years. Be proved by the board. Do was we meant in every confling. I did in 2 write this language expecting to need it. I wrote it because it was the right protection for the investors which had to shun one the besters what had trusted was will money. That was the truth. Bu Mel. Philip mentioned the word face on that one call. I started understanding what it also meant if someone tried to remel that face the wrong month. Derempked being sent all 3 complement. Derempked being sent all 3 combent to governments. His assistant Hallfair med recipted to Gorn. Hay had never escaped a single question about them. I want to be clear about some lething. I did set a trap in the dramatic sense. I did an econer a sense caster roderick. What I did is Troy Derek. What I did was simpler than that. I made sure that the approachings as idols maintained for this company remained exactly what they were. I didn't perby any intem. I didn't come anything. I didn't change anything. I just made sure nothing would disappear when I walked out the door. And then I waited. The morning of the close, I arrived to the office at 6:45. The conference room was a lady. Peen appearance purred. Catering set up. First print up. First print tattered sheets. The kind of comportal herd energy a room has before so much significant. My assistant. A woman Waver had worked with me for 11 years and Waver hand years and Waver knew when something was off. Cart my eye way when I walked in. He braved the room without you this morning. She said quietly, "Biuru and someone from the Strategic Analytics team to walk to review models. WHO, the new here. Brandon Kelly. 28er. Bend in pencil. Been here 3 months." I noted. A Dejitumba jacket. Been here 3 months. I noted. Adjusted my jack. Walked into the furnace room like it was an early morning. The investors are rivet and wavets. I greeted each except them. Philip Warren shook my hand formally and held it as Cian's Blaran Wigan Cyril Senor. "Good to see you, Marcus," he said. "Mark, good to see you, Marcus," he said. The sentence didn't mean anything ailthing us to it. Derek opened it the meeting. He was smooth the petitative. Derek opened it a mean. He was smooth and I'll give him that. Confident of more beering. A walked the room toward the position, the pipeline, the growth trajectory. All my numbers. Beautifully packaged in the dozen firearms, counts pheasant tightage, and then about 20 minutes in firearms clean slides. And then about 20 minutes in, with term sheets open in 10, with term sheets open in pen's eye, hand, he paused it, looked at me, and said it, "Marcus, W. Ween's going in a different direction. Your surface are no longer required. No preamble, no private consent squintined, no cringes of first-eyed conversation, no currences of first-eyed room. Just those willed words, delivered in front of those in front of 12 investors, with a pod rivet seated near their hem warned. I found out later. Hage briefed the podaker that morning, asked him to capture the moment of leadership. Transition. Had been planning to use it in internalment about the company devol. Preparing for hive and innisbold new production. I stood up slowly. Every eye in that room was on mint about the company's bold new direction. I stood up slowly. Every eye in that room was on men. I picked up my folio, my water glasses, habit, and my briefcase. The leather was worn soft from years of airports and early mornings. Inside was the retracing device and cation device. Mole. Unremarkable to look at. Everything in the room depended on it. In thing to zerbinicate. I gave Philip a brief nod. He returned it. Then I walked out. The hallway outside was long and marble-floored. My footsteps were cushioned. Everyone could review the terms on page 4. I was halfway to the elevator when I heard the first care scrape. I didn't tutor, turn round. Let me tell you what happened in that room after I left. I now Baselip told himself, to Dave Hun himself, to Dadesler. Derek tried to move Drake the Streinlitzom. Brandon Kelly, the 28-year-old, was brought into merit on to answer technical questions about the modals. The first question came from Victor Aldrichitz, a partner from a Kakafirich, a partner from a Chicago Firem Waterchitz, being one of those consistent committing for 4 years. Victor asked it about the stress test assumptions in the down-assigned scenario. Specifically, the correlations you said in the third part of Akinas, you said the third part of Bowler. Brandon that now what correlations Kevrikins were being reinforced at. He looked at the page, looked at the care. Said had Jean knew to pull up the back end document and desane. Derek tried to redirect. Brandon opened his laptop. Couldn't find the right file. The room waited. It was Philip Woskenge. Specifically regarding the retenkatikatine of Fussiter transition during an active capital raise. He placked a raise. Deplacked a single printed page on the table. The compliance a disclosure. The one, every investor's closure. The one, every investor's hot. The comes is closure. The one every this language, the verbatim ways heaven you ways. For the first time that morning, his composure slipped. Just slightly. The kinder slip that people like Philip notice immediately. That's a standard disclosures, deroser, der skets ausgrosher, Derek. Serd. We can work trove their transition. Victoral closure. Closed his folio. Kuwakedly. The sound was small and alarm brom. Bew. Everyone heard jarred it. A woman from one of the family office grups. Catherine Bloom. Waba th. Ben silent the entire morning, set her pen down in the center of her term sheet. Parallel to the binding, set her firm seat. Parallel to the binding. A deliberate peelments, untertern rooms. That church is understood. I'm going to need to speak with outside counsel before 12 feet proceed, said here. Derek's voice rose slightly. Don't need outside counsel. Don't need outside counsel. W can clarify the protocol right now. Philip didn't phrase his voice at Hall. Derry, without the abdication officer's signature, your compliancy DOC material. Where compliancy DOC imitation requires mandatory third-party activity before binding execution. That's not a preference. That's a protocol requirement you disclosed. W. Hale sorted the Akino agreement. Derek Calloway sighed something about being able to manage the aggregate timeline. Philip stood up. When Philip Warren stands up in a pin, the meeting is over. Everyone stands up in a pin, the meeting is over. Everyone at the table canoetrine is termines. When the stillness ends, the decision is made. Creston Capital will be pausing o commitment pending aggregate completion, he said. If heart, I have o commensal contact your team. Tay said. I'll have or your cancel contact your team today. He smoothed his jacket, picked up his briefcase, walk it out without, war his nokerm, Victor Altris Nax. Then Catherine Bloom. Then the rest of the family office consortium, one at a time, with the kind of cute efficiency that consents from people he requests then it's. The comes from people he requests seen that conservant, direct was still what it means. Direct is talking when the last one left. Her jar's voice change in real time as the room in tive, the pre-6 leaving it, the pre-6 cleaving it. The brittlance coming in. By the time the last investor walked out, $40 million had left that table. I was sitting in the lobby for the porticate. 40 million had left that stable. My former assistant sent. Her text was 4 words, all of them gone. I sat with that 4 words, all of them gone. I sat with that for on a moment. Then I ordered another coffee and opened my notebook. 20 my notes later. My phone buzzed again. Our side's consent. Doi twinsel. Doi de gone. What do you want me to tell them? I said to tell them. I didn't connect when I was ready. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready yet. I had some numbers to think to first. Here's the thing about spending eames inside one place. You stop seeing the full shape of what you've built, but you're alls looking at from the einset. That morning, from the first time in a long time, I was on the outside. I was on the outside. And from out there, the shape was very clear. Every relationship I built, every investor, wage and tar, quat, to rust to the numbers because they trusted the person behind them. None of that belonged to Meridian Capital Group. It belonged to the work, and the work was mine. Philip called it air. And the work was mine. Philip called at 11:42 that morning. Mary. Philip called at 11:42 that morning. I answered. Mercus. Quayside. Notting Elms for a moment. Dan. That was badly handily. You wet says that. I said. I'm going to ask you something directly. Is the infrastructure intact? Instinctively. Infrastructure intact. Intact were available. Danger were available. That depends on the arrangement. Another pause. Pilsaprindas juice silence carelessly. When he's calculating. Creston would be interested in exploring an independent advisory relationship. Your own terms. Your scope. W want the rigor. W want the go. Your own terms. W want the logo. Your own terms. I wrote that down. Give me a Phoebo days. I said he weed wheat. 30 wheat minutes after scode. Cade wheat. 30 minutes after Victor Eldreed. Sam a conversation, different voice. He was more direct. Have 3 other firms in my net one. It's gang about reliable independent financial analysis. Firms without the overhead of a morsel it says. Firms without the overhead of a Lara shop. Can WFE have lunch next week? I said yes. Catherine Bloom sent availed your rubberhead of a warn. Subject line, thinking forward. The body was 3 sentence. Her family office consortium was consortium its management manager relationships. They were looking for an independent mathematical partner. In under 4 hours, without making a single call myself. I sat in that coffee shop on the shop until it got cocking the great in the afternoon. Outside the window, the city of her trucks. People on their phones. The ordinary regorlins redney's day of a regular Gwedden's day. I turned about my tomp winedler of a regular bin's day. I turned about my dough, I to what the volleyball games I hadn't made it to. I thugambates have paid. I thugged about what wife had said at that kitchen table. Your dater only gets one father. That one landed differently sitting out 7. That one landed differently stickling outside, side and side, a sofity shop with my briefcase on the tear and nouter to be Kate's a pay shop with my briefcase on the tear next to me and nouter by had to be. I called her that evening. She sounded surprised to hear from me on a Wednesday. I told her something had changed at work. She asked if I was okay. I walk her something had for her awake. She asked if I was okay. I told her I thought tan okay but better tanned than okay. She allowed her von tanned than once better teen should okay. Then she said, Dad, what's that mean? I told her it's meant I was going to have more sunnies available, so was queuing to have more sunny viable. She was queued for a send, then she, okay, call me Sunny. I told her it's work what, for an wern. Bow to Q, financial advisory, independent, conflicted free. By lead for an institution. Squanflixid institusilmiance, we want the analytical rigor, which or without the core machinery. No flixid read. Just my systems, my experience, and 12 years of relations that had walked out of that conference room with me without being asked. Philip Streston was my first signed tropple. Cathorian Bloom's consortium came on board 6 weeks later as a package. Ford family offices wanna been scope broader. Den Herben scope broader Tannenthing I'm a diggin city meridian. BY. The E of my 4th month independent. I was managing more logical complexity than I had in my last 3 years at the company. With a team of 2, my former assistant stint. We called me 2 days after I left and asked if I was going to need help setting up, and a junior at least I hired out of a gradapuary. The revenue in first full year cleared a number. I hadn't seen on a person horror, a person on when 17 years of wielding someone a Sims. And Derek, I hage through do first wielding someone a Sims. And Derek, I hager doof the board to for mutual contact that the board put him on a performance plan 6 weeks after the conference the broom pour. 3 of the investors moved to 2 other managers. 2 of them to my new firm, though neither stive they'd made that awkward. The board couldn't testers made that awkward. The board couldn't algorithm math. 40 million committed capital doesn't disappear without a conversation. 8 the poor. Last. I heard. Derek Chautuk a starichi roll at a maller fireman pissimans. Reports to a 53-year-old whereas in Tez. Reports to a 5-year-old his own modals and doesn't own a ring light. I don't think about him much. That's the honestumans. They're honest onswear. There's a morning I keep coming back to. That's the honestumans where? About 2 months after I started the firm. I was at my desk. A real desk, an in-office I chose and paid for myself, reviewing a risk assessment from 4 Silip's team. My Dowchat assessment from Faradit's team. My dapter had detective the night before a pidgey skate tree. Just that. No contact. Just a pig. The kind of small. Then can someone is thinking of you without needing arenas. I sat with that for a while before I bit the file. Here's what I've learned about leverage. The real leverage learned about leverage. Real leverage. The kind that actually holds when someone tries to take something from you as Morm's Trace takes something from you. It's about being the person who wold shows up from the work that isn't glamorous. The 23 of her sessions. The complaints read a language nobody reads. The investor calls it elevant and nobody reads. The investor calls it anything that can't bennett prambit a rambit a rebel at squeer fins. The parsing thing that can't brand it or ram it or brup. Derek Tooch, the value was in the title, in the office, in the brand. He was wrong about all of it. The value was in the trust, and trust follows the person, not the letterhead. He walked me out of that conference room. He walked me out of that conference. To walked me out of that conference room thinking, Edrin spit me of everything. All he's dolly done was set me free in a ferry. My new office has better light than the old one. Corner windows. Fort Firth flow. Not high, but high enough to see the park across the street where Pecos the Moose the Morecambe people walk their dogs in the morning before the city walk us up. I've started going down there some morning first call. Just to walk, some a thing I hadn't done before. There was never Tom. Tom's out there's Tom. Last month, Philip came by for an in-pission review. First time W'ing, but face to face to see the conference room. Was a Neps took in the setup, and said, "Set down," and said, "This suits you better." I told him I thought itself too. He said to folder on the desk, the quarterly performance summary cinema theory Zenton the week before, chapted on Sever Vorverson. No surprise. H posit. Sam as alls. I said, Sam as alls. H he noted. That was the end of that conversation. With Philip, it alls went like that. Everything impertinent said. If Philip, it always went like that. Everything impertinent said in the fibber's possible words, before he left, 'cause reaching at his jack and set it the small object on me desk. A pen. Nice one. To have on the table at formal singings. You left without taking yours that day, he said. I picked it up. I wasn't planning on singing anything that morning anyway. He smiled. The small. The first time I deen sending in thing that morning in anyway. Smiled. Small. The first time I deen years. No. He said. Bis one's for the next singin'. No, he spined. Your name ate to the top. After he left, I set the pen on my desk where I could see it. 17 years. Every early morning and late night. Every sacrifice that seemed reasonable. At the time and less reasonable at the time and less reasonable in hindsight. Every quarter, when the numbers work because I made them work and somebody made them work and somebody has got the applause. All of that Ellie to a Wednesday morning in a conference room where a main weedin at the peanut the competent for Forden Monts. Tried the main friend Forden Monts tried to make them fizzum. And all of that LED, ever'n girly, to this gask, this light, this quite, this curette. I didn't win because I was clever enough to build a trap. I won's 'cause I spent 17 years doing the work honestly. And the people be benefited from that work workisly. And the people we could benefited from that workishly. And the people we could benefit slide. And the scrid, Kroon Ritzkusk, Hayes could fire me in front of 12 investors in Smilla for the fodder in the hallway. What he's couldn't it do. And this is the part Hever understood. Was take the relationship. The trust doesn't transfer with the title. The trust doesn't transfer with the title. It stays with the person here wearing it. He forgot that. And where the room him tied, he was left alone with 12 empty steers and a pious and a photographer which her had copteried exactly the wrong moment. And mean? I was 3 blocks away, drinking Safeth. During Safeth, Dwayne's Tom moment. Starting over. Some people caught Saraver, ridding Don Numbers, starting over.